Welcome to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 6, creating login scripts, redirecting My Documents folder, and securing the desktop. I have grouped together the topics that you as the administrator will find it very convenient to use, and the users will just simply love it simply because now they can access the resources very easily on the network. So here's what you're going to learn in this particular video. You will learn how to use the command prompt to map network drives. So we'll talk about what is a network drive and how it can be mapped using commands. You will also create login scripts so that when the users log on to their client computers, automatically the drives are mapped for them. Then what we will do is redirect the My Documents folder for users so that when users save their files in My Documents on their computers, it is actually sent to a central server and saved over there. This makes it possible for them to access the files in My Documents regardless of which computer they actually work on. So this is a great policy that redirects My Documents folder for users. And then finally, we'll create custom desktop settings where you will control exactly what the users can or cannot do on the desktop. For example, you will control whether they can go to the control panel and make changes out there, whether they can change the display, whether they can change the screensaver, or if they can even use the help command on the Windows XP desktop. So you have complete control over how to maintain the desktop for the clients, and you can also provide uniformity for your network in this manner. So let's get started with the first topic, which is creating mapping or creating network drives. So let's see what a network drive is and how you can actually map to it. To begin with, let's first see how users access resources on a network. So here's a typical user. Um, uh, a user, for example, Jill Smith, is sitting on a computer client 1 and she would like to access resources on a network. Now, this is a diagram that typically shows 2 servers and 1 client. So just assume over here that there are several clients and you can have more than 2 servers in your network. Now, the resources are stored on different servers. So some of the files are on DC1, other files are on DC2, and there may be other files, in fact, at other locations as well, where the files are stored for the user. Now, for the user to be able to access this file sometimes cannot be easy. This is what the user has to do. So let's make a connection to client 1. And what I'm going to do is log in as a user administrator. And once we are logged in, let's discuss the different ways users can access files or printers over the network. One of the most common methods is to actually navigate network places. So let's do that. In fact, my network places does not show up over here, so I'm going to put a desktop shortcut for that. And the way you do that on Windows XP is by right-clicking on the desktop and going to the tab called Desktop, Customize, and then over here I'm going to put My Documents and My Network Places. In fact, I do not need Internet Explorer. I'm going to take it out. And then click on OK. Alrighty, so now I have My Network Places. So typically, a user that wishes to access a resource on the network will double-click on My Network Places. And then over there, they'll have to click on entire network if they do not see the network diagram already. Here we go, Microsoft Network. Just check out the number of steps. Now there are 2 networks over here. Again, depending on how many domains you've set up, there may be several domains over here. It is possible to have at least 5 to 10 domains, if not more, in a typical network. So I'm going to double click on benfreddy.com, and now the user would have to know that, well, I need to go to DC1, and on DC1 there is a share. In our case, let's take the example of one of our shares, WinZip, and in there's a file that I need, namely zip.zap file that we had created in an earlier video. So once they find that file, then they can go ahead and perform the operations, either read that file by double clicking on it, or either edit, copy, and so forth. So that's one way of accessing the network. And you can imagine doing or accessing the network in this manner can be cumbersome for users, especially if you have several servers and several domains on your network. Now, the other method that they can use is, if the user is slightly more advanced, they can quickly get to that particular server by clicking on run and then typing the UNC name. So I would like to access shares on DC2. I'll type 2 slashes DC, and then DC2 and then hit enter, and then it's going to show me the shares that are available on DC2. Network path not found. Let's do, actually our DC2 is DC. There we go. And these are the shares that are currently available. They will double click on the share and then access it in the same manner. Windows XP makes it easier by sometimes remembering the most frequently used shares, but once again, you will rely upon the user's knowledge to be able to navigate the network, find the server, and then find the share on it. Okay? You as an administrator or you as a student of networking know all these steps. You know that you have to navigate network places or you can access shares through the UNC name. Do not expect the users to know that. They are there to perform the task for which they were hired. If that person is an accountant, this person may be familiar with computers but may not be a professional when it comes to networking. So it is your job to make it easier for users to access resources on a network. And here's how it can be done. What I'm going to do is log off from the client. And then what we will do is go on to server DC1. And then over here, I'm going to deliberately create a share. My first share in the C drive will be okay. Let's create a share. The first share over here is going to be HR. So here's my share, and now I'm going to share it. Okay, there we go. I got it. So I've created my first share on C called HR. Let's create a second share as well over here. So on DC1 in the C drive, I'm going to create my second share called production. And once again, we will share it. There we go. So there are two shares on DC1. Now, one of the ways you can make it easier for users to access this particular these shares is by once again going to the desktop. So I'm showing you all the steps. So here you are visiting client 1 and then logging in as you. That is why I deliberately broke out the connection over there, just to make you realize the amount of work that is involved in setting this up. And then we will make it easier by creating a script. And there we go. Now what you're going to do is the following. You're going to access DC1, and since you are the administrator, it's very easy to access it through the run button in network places. It's not available simply because by default it may not be there. So I'm going to show you how to turn it on. So I right clicked on the taskbar. I'm in a task menu now. Customize, and again, those of you familiar with XP should know this, but by default all the buttons are not displayed, so I need to go down the line over here and find my run command. It was there. I think it was not displayed simply because of the resolution that I have. It was not able to show me all the help, all the items in that particular menu. So I'm going to remove what I do not need. I do not need my documents, I do not need music, and I should be okay this time. Oops, sorry. Here I am. In fact, that message that popped up was telling me exactly that you do not have enough room. So here we go. I'm going to access DC1 now. So you as the administrator will access that particular share, select the share. Do not double click on it, just select it, right click and say map network drive, and then depending on what drive you would like to map, in our case I'm going to pick up the X drive. Any drive that has not been mapped already is available. I'm going to pick up the X drive, and then over here is a checkbox that says reconnect and log on, meaning that every time the user logs off and logs on, this mapping will be done. So that's great. You do not have to revisit that computer every time the user logs on, and that is great help. Now let's do the other one too. HR was the X drive, and we will do production as the Y drive. So I'm going to map the second drive, Y, click on finish, and I'm done. From this point on, you do not have to tell the users to either use network places or the UNC name from the run button. What you will tell them now is simply go to my computer. In other words, they should not be familiar, or they should not have to use my network places a lot. So you should tell them to go to my network, my computer, and in there will be a link for network drives, and in the link for network drives they should be able to find their X drive, and if they were to go down they will find the Y drives as well. So now for them to access a resource on DC1, they'll simply have to go to the X drive and then start using the files out there and so forth. Okay, so what the drive mapping does is the following. It makes it, number one, easy for users to access resources on a network, and number two, it makes the users transparent as to the location of files on a network. For example, if you're running out of room and you would like to move the HR files to a different server, let's say DC2, all you'll do is simply copy the files during non-business hours, of course, copy the files to a different share it as the same, and then in the login script, map it to the new server, and the user will not know the difference. As far as they're concerned, they will still continue to use the X drive. In fact, the files have been moved from one server to another. In the absence of a login script or drive mappings, what they would have to do is you would have to map a different drive for them physically by going to each desktop, and then you have to tell them that, well, if your work was over there first, now it is on this server, and so forth. Okay, so too many steps adds too much confusion to the client computers. Now, what I'm going to do is disconnect this. So I'm going to right click on this and say disconnect, so that I do not have these drives available to me. So this is a good method, and I'm sure you've all used this method. The only problem with this method is, just imagine if you have, I'm going to log out of Windows XP again. Just imagine if you have several hundred client computers and you have 15 to 20 servers, and you have to set up different drive mappings for different servers, and remember, different servers have different shares on it also. So if you have 15 servers and each server may have 3 or 4 folders shared that different users need access to, well, you are in trouble, because now you have several different shares to manage, and certain users require certain shares. You would have absolutely no control over who gets what resource. Forget trying to make it easier for them. So what we need to do is the following. What we need to do is create a login script, and the whole concept behind the login script is the following. Every time the user logs on, as they're logging on, a particular batch file will run, which will be the login script, and the batch file will simply inform the client that, well, you have 3 shares available to you. These are the folders that you use on a regular basis. So if you want to go to the HR folder, simply go to the X drive. If you would like to go to the production folder, simply go to the Y drive, and so forth. Okay, that's number one. Number two, obviously different kinds of users would like to have access to different kinds of shares on a network. Those are the shares that they use on a normal basis. And that's the other thing about drive mapping. If there are if there are, let's say, 12 different shares that users use, do not map all 12. If you have too many drive letters, that makes it even more confusing. All you want to do is, if there are 3 or 4 different shares that users use on a regular basis to store their work or to access files, such as the HR folder, then map those so that if they need a form for vacation or leave, they do not have to call up the HR department and then find out exactly where the form is located. Simply they go to the share, find the forms in the forms folder there, and then be able to access that form. So that's the whole concept behind drive mapping, having certain folders that users use on a regular basis available to them, and the access to those folders is completely transparent to the user. And the way we will do that is by creating a login script. So let's get started with what a login script is and how it is created. Now, a login script is simply a batch file. You got to type a bunch of commands in that batch file. So what we need to first do is understand what these commands are and how you're going to actually use those commands in a batch file. So what I'm going to do is make a connection to DC1, and then over here, let me show you how these commands can be run. So I'm going to go to the run, but go to start, click on run, and then access the command prompt, and then over here this will be a scratch board. I'm going to clear the screen here and now show you how to do a drive mapping using commands. The command to do a drive mapping is net use. It's 2 words, so you have to put a space between the two. And then the next item in the command is the drive letter that you would like to map. So if you would like to map the X drive, you will click on X and then put a colon. And now you need to tell the UNC name of the share that you would like to map. So as an example, I would like to map the X drive for DC1 /HR. Remember, we had a share called HR. So what this command is saying is that go ahead and map. So this is the command. Net use is the mapping command. It says that go ahead and map the X drive to the to the share HR, which is on DC1. So let's hit the enter button over here, and it says the command completed successfully. So I know that my command is working fine. Let's check it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my computer over here, and there we go. The X drive has been mapped to the share HR. Now, of course, I'm going to do this on the server, then eventually you want to run this on a client machine because it is a client that needs a shared HR. But what I wanted to show you over here is a command that will actually map the drives for us. Okay, so that was the command that you will use, and we tested this command out. We know it works. So now our next objective is to actually create a batch file and then put this command in there. So I'm going to minimize the screen one more time, and actually what we'll do is disconnect this so that this drive is not available to us on DC1. Okay, so let's create a new batch file. So what I'm going to do is go to the C drive, and on C drive I'm going to create a new text file, and let's call the text file login.bat. You need to put the extension .bat, meaning that it's a batch file, and the moment I hit enter you will see that the icon will change. In fact, it's letting us know that you're not using the .txt extension for the text file. Are you sure you want to do that? Let's say yes. Okay, once this is done, you're going to right click on it and say edit. If you double click on it, you're actually running the batch file. So right click and say edit, and then over here what I will do is type my commands for that batch file. So I'm going to type over here netuse X drive, and we're going to map the X drive to DC1/HR. Then the second folder that we had created on the C drive was production, so let's map that as well. So the command this time should be netuse y:, because I would like to map the Y drive to DC1/production. Now remember, you can map different drives for different servers, so you do not have to keep using all the shares on DC1. In the same login script, what I can also do is map drives for the different server altogether. So let's do the following. I'm going to make a connection to DC2, and then over here let's make our third folder in the C drive, and let's call this folder sales, and I'm going to share this folder. I'm going to share it as sales, and we are in business. Okay, please remember, even though the label over here is DC2, if you recall, when I was installing when I was installing the operating system, and then doing DC promo, I had left the name as DC, the generic name, rather than making it DC2. So even though I'm calling it DC2, the actual name for this server is DC, and we need to use the word DC in our netuse command. So I'm going to minimize the screen. We've got a DC2, and over here we'll type the third drive mapping, which is netuse Z drive, and we'll map the Z drive to DC/sales. Okay, and now let's save this file. Done. And now let's test this file. Always, before you actually make a policy out of this, it's a good idea to test the file, because if the file does not work as expected, guess what? The policy will not work either. So let me find this file. There it is, login.bat file. And what I'm going to do is run this file. Now, if I run it over here, it will open up the window and close it very quickly. So what I'll do is I'll go to the command prompt and run it from there. So here's my command prompt, and I'm going to type the word login.bat. You do not have to type the extension .bat. Over here I'm simply doing it to show you the completeness of these commands. So there we go. I ran the command, and it's saying that it successfully created the X, Y, and the Z drives. Let's check it out. Going to my computer. Oops, sorry. Wrong computer. Going back to DC1, because that's where I ran it on. Okay, I need to minimize this. So going to my computer, I should find the X drive, the Y drive, and the Z drive. So we are making progress. In other words, if I were to run this file on any computer, on that computer, this file is going to do a drive mapping to the X drive, which is a share HR on the C drive of DC1. Then it's going to do a drive mapping for Y drive, which is again a share production on DC1, and it's going to do a drive mapping for Z drive for the sales share on DC. Okay, so I can simply now run this file and have my drive mappings done for me. If I would like to change the drive mapping, simply modify that file a little bit and then run it, and then my drive mappings will be changed as well. So we have made a lot of progress. We can now automate, and that's exactly what a batch file does, automate the process of actually creating drive mappings on computers. Now the next challenge is, I would like to run this file not on my computer, but on each and every computer that should get this drive mapping. Rather, when a user logs on, this file should run automatically so that the appropriate users get the appropriate drive mappings. In other words, in a large network, you will create several of these batch files, one for each department or one for a typical group of users. So when a particular user logs in, that particular drive mapping batch file will run and will give them the appropriate shares that they need for their daily work. So that's our next challenge, and that can be accomplished using a login script. So let me show you exactly how to do that. So I'm on DC1, and what we're going to do is, the first thing again is we will disconnect our drive. So I'm going to say disconnect to each one of these. Okay, and we know that our batch file is good. Let's run this batch file in a manner that will help us on our network. So I'm going to close all these windows and let this be open. Let's go to Active Directory users and computers. And again, to do this, you need to create a group policy. So let's go ahead and see how to create a group policy for this. And again, we will use a test user in the accounting department, namely Jill Smith. So what I would like to do is create a group policy object that is linked to the California OU here. So I'm going to select California, right click, properties, group policy, and let's create a new policy. This policy we will call drive mapping policy. Okay, I'm going to just use one word for it. Alrighty, so it's done. Now we're going to edit this GPO so that it does the following. Now a little bit more about login script. Let me first navigate this and show you that you can actually create 4 different login scripts. So I'm going to expand under computer configuration, Windows settings, and over here you can see that the 2 of these scripts are startup and shutdown. In other words, once a computer starts, you can run a file that will do drive mappings or do other things for you. When you shut down the computer, you can also run a file that will do run a script for you. So you can run a script every time the computer starts and every time the computer shuts down. You can also run a script. I'm going to go under user configuration now. You can also run a script when the user logs on or when the user logs off. So in actuality, you can set as many as 4 scripts, and within a script you can have as many batch files as you want. So Microsoft has given you complete flexibility as to creating as many drive mappings or running other commands or scripts on the servers as the users are logging in. So these are the 4 scripts, and you also need to know the order in which they run, especially for Microsoft certification exams. The first script that runs is the startup screen because the computer is starting up. The next script that runs is the logon script because the user is logging on. The third script that runs is the log off script because the user is logging off. And last but not the least, every time you shut down the computer, the script that is run is the shutdown script. Okay, a typical example of a log off script would be, well, let's say that you've done a drive mappings and every time the user logs off, you would like to delete those drive mappings like the way I've been doing it manually. Again, you do not have to do that, but if you would like to, well, the log off script will do that. A shutdown script will be something where every time the computer is shut down, go to the temporary folders on that computer and basically clean it out. The cookies, the temporary internet files, and so forth. So that would be a good example of a shutdown script. Okay. So what we're going to do is create a login script for when the user logs in. So I'm going to double click on, let's minimize this so that we don't have to worry about this. I'm under the user configuration, and I'm going to create a login script by double clicking on the logon item over here. Now, the login script is actually created. All you have to do is put it in the right place, and this is a little tricky process. So let me show you exactly how this is done. I'm going to click on the add button, and over here I need to click on the browse to pick up my login script. Now here's the problem. The login script must be in this particular location. I cannot navigate, or I should not navigate to the C drive and pick up my login script from there simply because the group policy does not read the login script from any other location but from over here. And this location is pretty long, as you can see. Look at this. On DC1 there's a share called sysvolve. Actually there's a folder called sysvolve in which there's a share called sysvolve. And in there there's a benbrady.com folder. In there is a policies folder. And in there are several folders with GUI names like these. Okay, so it is impossible. In other words, this particular GUI is mapped to the script, it is mapped to the group policy drive mapping that I'm just creating. In there is a users container. I'm sure you get the idea. In there's a scripts container, and in there is a login container. And I have to actually put the file exactly over there. The problem is, you can't even memorize this to begin with, number one. And number two is that different group policy objects have different GUI names over here. Okay, so this GUID, or the graphic globally unique ID, is not descriptive. It does not give you a good idea as to which GPU this belongs to. So it is almost impossible to know exactly where to put it. And do not navigate to the C drive and pick up the drive mapping, simply because it won't read it from there in any case. It has to read it from the sysvol folder. So in order to do that, this is what I do. I'm going to close this window. You need the item to be available in the right place. So what I'm going to do is click on show files over here. And in here, as you can see, it shows me the location of where this particular login script should be. So now what I'm going to do is simply use copy and paste and put it in this location. So I'm going to minimize this particular window and see if I can get to the C drive by right clicking on the start button. And here's the C drive. And I'm going to find my login script batch file over here. I'm going to say copy and then close this window and go back to this window and say paste over here. Now my file is in the right location. Okay, so it's a little trick that I use. I'm going to show it to you one more time. Okay, so we were in the drive mapping GPU, and if I would like to edit it, I simply select it and then edit the GPU, and then you go to log on. Now your file has to be in a certain location. To make it appear in a certain location, simply go to the file, copy it, click on show files, go to this window and paste it. Once the file is pasted, now I can easily add it by clicking on the add button, clicking on browse, and look at this. My script is available in the right location. If you remember, before this window was blank because the script was not there. So click on open, and there are no parameters for this. I'm going to click on OK, apply, and done. Okay, so I've assigned this particular login script to this GPU, and let's close these windows. And again, just so that we make it run faster, we will simply click on the up arrow over here, or the up button, to make sure that this is processed before this one is, just so that in this particular lab I can push it to you much more easily. Click on apply, click on OK, and we're done. Okay, so you've successfully mapped that particular login script, and once this login script runs on a client, this client will actually get the drive mappings on his or her computer. So let's check one more thing out before we continue. Go to switch windows over here. Actually, I have a different figure for this. Alright, so this drive mapping GPU is being applied to the user Jill Smith. The arrow over here is just an illustration arrow. We have actually applied it to the California OU over here, and then because Jill Smith is in a California OU, when she logs in to the network, she will be able to get the effects of this GPU, namely drive mappings on her computer. So let's check it out. What I'm going to do is minimize these screens, and then this time we will go to our client computer, which is client 1. Let's minimize all this to go back to our workstation. Let's see if I have a connection open. I don't. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is access I'm going to access the client 1, and then log in as Jill Smith, and then see if she gets the drive mappings for us. Now there is one thing that we forgot. What we need to do is go back to DC1, and remember we had created this batch file refresh so that we push the policies quickly. I should have done this sooner, but let's make an attempt to log in as Jill Smith on client 1. So let's log in as Jill Smith over here. Type in her password, and let's see what happens. Okay, now what we have to do is go to my computer and check out whether she got the drive mappings. So let's do that. I'm going to access my computer from the start button over here. My computer. And there we go. Check this out. Network drives, the X drive, the Y drive, and the Z drive, which is actually on DC. Okay, so good job. All you have to do is create these batch files, and make sure that you create a batch file for each department, perhaps, because different departments will be able to different departments need access to different kinds of shares on the network, and assign the right login script to the right department. And if you've done a good job designing your OU structure, that should not be an issue. If you remember, one of the reasons why you design proper OUs is simply because you can put the right users in the right OUs. And now once the right users are in the right OUs, you now can assign drive mappings to them by means of login scripts, and the administration of the domain becomes so much easier. So this is a great way of administering the domain. I'm sure some of you may or may not have been familiar with this, but now I've shown you a login script so that you know exactly how to create these drive mappings on your network shares. Simply all you have to do is use the netuse command and then use it in a batch file and assign that batch file to a group policy object to accomplish this. So let me minimize the screen on DC1 and let's see what's the next topic on our agenda over here. So I showed you how to map network drives. We had an extensive discussion as to why you need those network drives. We created the login scripts, and now we're ready to actually go on to the next topic, which is redirecting the My Documents folder. So let's see what that means. Typically, when users log on to the network and they use applications, most of the applications, especially Microsoft applications, but now I've seen that most applications do that as well, that typically your work will be saved in your My Documents folder. I had actually hidden the My Documents folder over here on my desktop, so I'm going to put it back by going to the desktop. Okay, and that is how Microsoft wants you to work. So everything is under My Documents. In fact, your My Documents is organized for different items such as My Music and so forth. In fact, if you install certain applications, like I've installed Visio over here for our network diagrams, it also installs additional folders over here. My Shapes, your pictures go in over here, your music goes in over here. If you install a video software, you will see that a folder My Video is created over here, and then your videos will be saved as over there as well. So the whole idea behind this is to make it easier so that every time a user logs on, they access their own My Documents, and their documents are always available to them. The only problem is that on a network, when you start saving files in a My Documents folder, in other words, users are using the network and they're saving the files in My Documents simply because by default that's a location where files are saved. The problem is this My Documents is actually a location on your C drive. In fact, I think I did it too quickly. Let me select My Documents, right click and then click on Properties. And here's where everything is being stored so that you get an idea as to how to use this. In the C drive, there's a folder called Documents and Settings, and in that folder there's a folder called Administrator, and in that folder there is a folder called My Documents, and over there is where everything is being saved. In other words, every user has a folder under Documents and Settings in a C drive, and every time the user logs onto that folder, this My Documents is being mapped over there so that everybody's work is saved separately. So let's check that out. I'm going to go to the C drive of this computer, and in there we will visit Documents and Settings, and any user that has logged onto this computer, so a user administrator and the user Bob has logged onto this computer, they will have their own settings, including the My Documents in this particular folder. Now, the problem over here is the following. If every user were to save their work on My Documents, there are two distinct problems that I can think of that will create havoc on a network. The first one is that if that particular computer is not available to that user, the user may not be able to retrieve their files and work on it the next day. Okay, so let's say the user uses client 1 on a normal basis. Client 1 for some reason is unavailable today, and they have to use client 2 to access the network. Well, when they use client 2, My Documents is not available in client 2, so they will be without the files. Number one. Number two, it becomes a headache on your part to actually perform backups, because after all, you're responsible for backing up files for user files on a network. Now, you will have to visit each computer, or you'll have to create some kind of a backup process that actually visits each computer to certain folders and backs up their work from them. Okay, it's a headache. It cannot be managed in a typical environment, and it should not be done in this manner. What you need to do is the following. What you need to do is make sure that the contents of My Documents goes to a central server on a share, so that every time a user accesses My Documents and saves documents to it, it is not saved to the local computer, but it's saved to a central computer on a network. In this manner, no matter which computer the user uses, every time they go to My Documents, they're actually not going to their C drive. Instead, they're going to the share on the central server, so that no matter which computer they use to, they always access the same share. When they save the documents, it is saved to the same share, and it is always accessible from any computer on the network. And for you, it's easier to perform backups, because all you have to do is back up that particular share where the users are saving their documents, and you have saved up user files for the entire network. So let me show you exactly how to redirect My Documents. We will once again access DC1, and on DC1 I'm going to create a location where these files will be stored. So on the C drive, I'm going to create a new folder and call it user docs. You can give it any name you want, of course. I'm just calling it user docs. And I'm going to share this folder. So let's share this. Done. Okay. Now, what we need to do is create a new group policy object. I do not need my command prompt, so let's close this. And let's go on to Active Directory users and computers. And again, I'll use the California OU as a test OU for this process. So we're going to create a new GPO over here. And this particular group policy object, we will call it new. And we will call it my docs redirect. Okay, now let's inform this GPO as to what to do. In order to do this, what you need to do is the following. You need to go to Windows settings. Under user configuration, you need to go to Windows settings. And in Windows settings, you need to go to folder redirection. And here's a folder redirection for my documents. As you can see, you can even redirect the menus in the start menu. And in my documents also, you can redirect the sub-documents, namely my pictures. Okay, so the only one that I'm interested in is documents at this point. So I'm going to select my documents, right-click, and then go to properties. Now over here, by default, of course, there is no policy defined for this. When I click on a drop-down box, there are two different policies that I can set up. The first policy is a basic policy that says redirect everyone's folder to the same location. So when I select this, all I have to do is put a target location, and it gives me the clue over here as to how to do this. And we're going to use this example. What this is saying is that everybody in a network who gets the effects of this policy, their work will be redirected to the same folder. Now, this may be okay on a smaller network. On a larger network, this may be impractical simply because of the volume or the number of files that has to be stored on a single server. So what you can also do is you can use a more advanced policy. Over here, what you can specify is the name of the group and the path for each group. In other words, if there is a group called finance, all the users in a finance group, their work should be stored on maybe a finance server in a certain shared out there. All the users in the marketing group, their work should be stored on a different server in a different path over there. So this gives you more control as to which user documents go on which share. In our case, because this being a small network, we will select this, simply redirect everyone to the same location, and then over here I will type the UNC name of the location that you need to access. So it will be 2 slashes. The name of the server is TC1, and in there I have created a share called user docs. Alright, and over there I'm going to put in a variable percentage user name percentage. What this variable will do is the following. It will actually create a folder called username. It will create a folder with the login name of each user that logs on. That's what the variable percentage username percentage does. So that if a user Jill Smith logs on, there will be a folder called Jill Smith. It will be their username folder, and all her work will be under Jill Smith's folder. This is very important because now under user docs you will find a folder for each user. Okay, Jill, Mark, and so forth, and their work will be saved in that folder. For two reasons. Number one, each user cannot access somebody else's folder. So yes, there is security on this. When Jill logs on, she can access her work only, not somebody else's. And number two, their files do not get replaced by somebody else's file. So if Jill creates a file called resume.doc and Mark does the same thing, creates a file called resume.doc, Jill's file is going into her folder, Mark's file is going to his folder. They are not overwriting each other's work. So that is a key point as well. So the variable percentage username percentage will create a folder with that name. We'll click on the apply button over here. Click on OK. And once again, we will push our policy. So let's do that. I'm going to click on close over here. Actually, let's go back to the policies. And again, just for the purposes of this lab, I'll make it run as a top policy so I can show you the effects immediately. Close this. And now we will refresh our policies by double clicking on it. Okay, I'm going to minimize this. And now it's time to check out whether this policy worked or not. So I'm going to log in as Jill Smith on client 1. So let's make our connection to Jill Smith. Okay. And now to find out, what we will do is right click on my documents, go to the properties of my documents, and see exactly where the files are being saved. Actually, you can tell from the logo over here that things are working. Okay. Okay, but let's right click properties and check this out. From now on, every time this user saves their documents in My Documents, it will actually show up on this particular folder. Let's check that out too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start WordPad over here on her computer and type this is a test document. Yes, I know how to type. You can tell from the way I type this, but I'm not good at it. So I'm going to click on save like a typical user would. And where is it saving? In My Documents. Great. So now I'm going to call it test. And just out of curiosity, let's click on the drop down box over here. Okay, so as far as the user is concerned, they're saving it under My Documents. They have absolutely no clue where this My Documents is going, and they shouldn't have a clue. It is your job to manage the network. Alrighty, so it's done. They can go to any computer and access it. And let's actually check it out on DC1. So I'm going to go to the physical location where this folder was created on the C drive. There is a folder called user docs, and guess what happened? The user, the logon name is JSmith, so there's a folder called JSmith. When another user, Peter Ramirez, logs in, he will have a folder P Ramirez, so their work is distinct from each other, and I cannot access it also simply because I am not JSmith. Access is denied. Okay, of course I can take ownership of this object and go in through that, but the point I was trying to make is that the file is located over there. I cannot access it. However, I do have the right to back up these files and folders as long as I have the backup operator role. In other words, I belong to the group called the backup operators group, or I'm the administrator. So that is how you redirect My Documents for users, so that no matter which computer they use, their work in My Documents is always accessible to them. Alright, so that finishes our second topic, which was redirecting My Documents folder, and now we will go on to the third topic, which is creating custom desktop settings for group policy objects. And this is going to be a fun lab. So what I'm going to do is disconnect as or log off as JSmith. Okay, did you see the synchronization is complete? Because even if something was saved locally, or if there is something that's saved on a network from another computer, the two computers always synchronize the files with each other so that the same set of files is available in My Documents on both places. Alrighty, so let's create custom desktop settings. What do I mean by that? Well, GPOs are there not just for application deployment and for drive mappings. They're also there for security purposes. In other words, you can provide custom desktop settings and provide security on the desktop for your network using group policy objects. And let me show you how to do that. This is one of those places where network administrators can literally play God with the desktop of the users and decide exactly what settings they can use and what settings they cannot use. So over here I'm going to create a new group policy under the California OU, and I'm going to call this policy the desktop policy. Oops, caps key was on over there. Alright, and now let's edit this policy, and what we need to do is the following. And I'm going to show you a few of these items over here, but I would highly appreciate if you were to spend some time, I would say at least half an hour, going through the different buttons over here just to get a good idea as to where the different items are. Under user configuration, let's expand administrative templates, and in there let's first click on this folder called start menu and taskbar and look at the number of settings that is available over here. We just reposition the window a little bit better. None of these policies have been configured, but here are the different things that you can do on the start menu and taskbar. So for example, on the start menu, what do you see? You see the run button and so forth. Well, if you do not want the users to have the run button, guess what? Here we go. Remove run from the start menu. Let's configure that. I'm going to double click on it and then say enable. So what we have done is taken away the ability of the user to go to click on start and then be able to use the run button. And now I'm going to click on the OK button over here. Now just a word of caution over here. Some of these can be double negatives, so you have to read the policy and decide whether you need to enable or disable. So for example, remove run from the start menu is the name of the policy. In order for me to remove run, I need to enable that policy. Okay, so do not disable it. Disable basically means that the policy is disabled. It will actually not run the policy. All right, let's how about something else? How about going down to this, we were in the start menu and taskbar. Let's go to the desktop this time and see the items that are available in desktop. Over here what I'm going to say is hide my network places on the desktop. Let's do this property. So this person will not be able to see the desktop. On the desktop, the icon for network places. What we will also do is remove the properties from my computer context menu, enable it. Just picking up some policies over here so I can make a lab out of this and show you. Hide Internet Explorer, hide let's do something else. How about hide Internet Explorer on desktop? Also, not that it was there, but I'll just enable this policy. So we were in the start menu and taskbar, and then you saw certain items on the desktop. Now, as we go down this list, you will see that there are hundreds of policies, literally. These add up to more than 100 policies, I'm sure. Now, how do you remember which policy to use and where to access it from? Two ways. Number one, you're going to spend some time with this, going through the policy so that you can keep it in the back of your mind. If you ever need to do a certain thing, you can check out the various components and see if that policy is available. Number two, these policies are organized according to these folders over here. So if there is something that you would like to configure on the on the start menu or in the taskbar, then you have to go to this folder called start menu and taskbar. For example, run. Hide run was over there. So here's a policy that says on the start menu and taskbar, you have a policy that says remove run from the start menu. Okay, if there is something on a desktop that you would like to configure, go to the desktop. And then you'll find that policy over there. Okay. Now, let's take another example. Control panel. This is a common one. Now, if you would like to control the control panel completely, click on control panel. And one of the things you can say is disable control panel. In other words, users will not be able to use the control panel. Or what you can do is be much more specific. For example, you can say that, well, they can use control panels, but in display, well, here we go. You can control each and every tab in the display. You can disable the whole item. In other words, disable display in the control panel. I'm going to do that, to enable that. In other words, I'm not disabling the entire control panel over here. This I'll let it go. But what I've done is I've entered display and said that, well, you know what, users should not be able to touch that particular setting and change anything that I've set up over there. This will help you in compliance with screensaver policies and with the color of the desktop or the logo of the desktop that appears on the screens. Okay, in this manner you can go down each of these items and then configure them. Let's go into star system, and then over here also there are log on and log off things. For example, when the login scripts run, are they visible, are they not visible, and so forth. So if I were you, I would take the time to go through these policies, especially the ones in the control panel. For example, add remove programs. You can take away their ability to add or remove programs from the control panel, and you can control exactly what you want to take away. For example, if you want to disable the whole thing, do this, but remember, if you disable this, do not publish applications, because users need to go there to actually access those applications. Or you can disable individual items from here as well. Okay, one more thing I want to show you is that under Windows settings, there are also settings for Internet Explorer, okay, that you can configure. So have a look over there also, and let's see what else there is to show you over here. Let us go under Windows Components, and in Windows Components also you'll be able to find the different components of Windows that you can control. For example, Internet Explorer one more time, and look at this, you can control exactly what goes on in the Internet Explorer. So here, let's take a couple of examples. So to reposition this window a little bit. And in I was in Windows Explorer. How about Internet Explorer? In Internet Explorer, I can go to Internet Control page, and then I can disable the general page and so forth. So let's do that. I'm going to say do not let people change what's on the general page. The general page also has the home page set over there. So I'm going to do that. And I think we've performed enough activities over here. The idea was to give you some examples as to exactly how you can actually take away or customize the desktop for the users. Now I'm going to take this policy up like we always do, and then click on apply. And let's log in as Jill Smith and see the settings of this particular group policy object. Let's refresh our policy. Once again, just as a reminder, this particular batch file has the following lines of code in it. So if you are watching this video in between, or if you haven't done this batch file, you'd like to do it now, just create the batch file with the following lines of code, and for convenience, I save it on the desktop so that I can run it easily whenever I want to. Alrighty, now it's time to log in as Jill Smith and check out the effects of this GPO. So what I'm going to do is go to client 1 and log in as Jill Smith. Okay, let's check out whether our GPO is actually working on Jill Smith. So I'm in, and let's see if I can remember some of the things. One of the things we said was we want to remove the run button from a start menu. Then we disabled, I believe, the display from being changed at all. We also disabled um, the home page or the general page from Internet Explorer. So let's check it out. Let's first start with run, and there we go, run is gone. Okay, let's try to change the background color over here. Properties, there we go. Your system administrator disable the display control panel. And what else? Internet Explorer, properties, and look at that, the general tab is gone. So I cannot change the home page even if I want to as this user. So this gives you total control over exactly what can be accomplished on the user's computer. All right, I'm going to log off. Again, the biggest thing over here is to experiment with the different settings that are out there under the group or under the administrative templates out there, and then determine exactly what you need on your particular desktop, and then you'll be able to configure the desktop from there. So I believe we have covered all the topics in this particular video that I wanted to. Let's summarize. You would like to perform or you would like to give drive mappings to users. One of the ways you can do that is by visiting each computer, or you can create a login script, and every time the user logs on, the login script will run and they will get the drive mappings. Users typically save their work in the My Documents folder. The My Documents folder by default saves files on each and every desktop in their own computers. This makes it a problem because now you cannot access those files if that particular computer is unavailable. So what you want to do is redirect My Documents so that everything is saved to a central server, and no matter where users are, they will always be able to access their files, and you as the administrator will be able to back up the user's work by simply backing up one or more folders. And last but not the least, we created custom desktop settings so that you control exactly what users can or cannot do on the client machines. I thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you very soon in a different video in Active Directory.